It was a tense morning in Ouagadougou when Ibrahim Traoré was awakened by an urgent call from Colonel Amadou Diallo, the defense minister. Mr. President, our intelligence has intercepted extremely worrying American communications. You must see this immediately. Traoré dressed quickly, his mind racing, and rushed to the military command center in the presidential palace. In a secure room, classified documents were spread across the table, each marked with CIA and Pentagon stamps. "What have you discovered?" Traoré asked, his voice steady but laced with the weight of the moment. "Operation Desert Dawn, sir," the colonel said, pointing to a specific document. "An American plan to destabilize African governments that resist Washington's influence. Burkina Faso is at the top of their list." Traoré scanned the document, his jaw tightening as he read. The plan outlined psychological operations, economic sabotage, and, if necessary, preparations for regime change. "How many American agents are in our country?" he asked, his tone resolute. 747 registered American citizens, sir," reported Major Issa Cohn, the chief of national intelligence. "Our services have confirmed that 700 of them have direct or indirect links to intelligence agencies." Traoré exhaled deeply. At 35, he had faced countless challenges, but never a threat so brazen to Burkina Faso's sovereignty. "Call an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. I want all ministers here in 2 hours." "And the Americans, sir?" Colonel Diallo asked. "We'll give them exactly 48 hours to leave our country," Traoré declared, his voice unwavering. "Burkina Faso will not be a playground for American geopolitical schemes." Meanwhile, at the American embassy in Ouagadougou, Ambassador Thomas Bradley was unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to unravel. 2 hours later, the presidential palace buzzed with urgency. Traoré stood in the Situation Room, surrounded by his top ministers and military commanders, the air thick with tension. "Gentlemen," he began, projecting intercepted documents onto a large screen. "Today, we've uncovered a United States operation to destabilize our government. This is not conjecture. These are official CIA documents." Dr. Mariam Zongo, the foreign minister, studied the papers with rising indignation. "Mr. President, this is a blatant violation of our sovereignty. They're treating us like a colony. Operation Desert Dawn has 3 phases, Traoré continued, pointing to a detailed timeline. "First, economic destabilization through sanctions and pressure on our trading partners. Second, psychological operations to sow internal division. Third, support for opposition groups under the guise of democratic change, a clear euphemism for a coup." Fatuma Diarra, the Minister of Economy, shook her head in disbelief. "Mr. President, this explains the recent pressures on our trade agreements with China and Russia. It wasn't random." "Exactly," Traoré agreed. "And it explains why we have 700 American citizens in a nation of 22 million. That proportion is impossible without a hidden agenda." Major Cohn presented profiles of the suspects. "Sir, 340 are ex-military, 180 have intelligence backgrounds, 125 work for NGOs with questionable funding, and 55 are journalists with no verifiable credentials. They all leave," Traoré stated firmly. 48 hours. No exceptions. "And if Washington refuses?" Colonel Diallo asked. "Then we'll show the world what they've planned for Africa," Traoré replied, touching a thick confidential folder. "We have evidence that will shake the international community." The decision was made. Burkina Faso would assert its independence in a way it hadn't in decades. At 2 o'clock sharp, Traoré instructed an official letter be drafted for the American ambassador. In his private office, with the Burkina Faso flag standing proudly behind him, he dictated each word carefully to his secretary. "Your Excellency Thomas Bradley, Ambassador of the United States," the letter began, "it is with deep regret that I inform you of the discovery of compromising documents detailing American intelligence operations on Burkina Faso soil." The letter continued in diplomatic but unyielding language. "Operation Desert Dawn constitutes an unacceptable violation of our national sovereignty. Consequently, the government of Burkina Faso declares 700 American citizens persona non grata, demanding their immediate departure within 48 hours. Traore paused, choosing his next words with precision. Furthermore, copies of these intercepted documents will be shared with the African Union, the United Nations, and international media to expose systematic patterns of American interference in African affairs. At 3:30 in the afternoon, an official Burkinabe delegation arrived at the U.S. Embassy. Security personnel grew visibly tense as they spotted vehicles bearing presidential flags. Dr. Zongo, flanked by protocol officers, personally delivered the letter to Ambassador Bradley. "Minister, this must be a misunderstanding," Bradley stammered, scanning the document. 48 hours is not enough time, Mr. Ambassador, Dr. Zongo interrupted, her tone polite but firm. "The deadline is non-negotiable. The documents in our possession leave no room for ambiguity." Bradley tried a final tactic. "We need to contact Washington." "Of course," Dr. Zongo replied with a measured smile. "In the meantime, our security services will monitor all 700 individuals to ensure compliance with the deadline." As the Burkinabe delegation departed, the U.S. Embassy descended into chaos. Ambassador Bradley raced between rooms, coordinating urgent calls to Washington. "Connect me to the Secretary of State immediately," he shouted to his assistant. "This is a national security emergency." In the secure communications room, CIA agents shredded documents and wiped computers. The station chief, known only as Agent Carter, spoke in an encrypted call to Langley. "Operation Desert Dawn is fully compromised. We need immediate extraction." On the streets of Ouagadougou, news of the American expulsion spread like wildfire. Crowds gathered outside the embassy, not in anger, but in curiosity about this historic moment. 700 Americans expelled, blared a headline on national radio. President Traoré reveals secret plans against Burkina Faso. At the presidential palace, Traoré prepared for an international press conference. "Yakuba," he told his communications advisor, "invite all foreign correspondents, BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, France 24, everyone." "What's the communication strategy, sir?" Yakuba asked. "Simple truth," Traoré replied. "We'll show the world the documents and let the facts speak." At the embassy, Bradley finally reached Washington. "Mr. Secretary, the situation is catastrophic. Traoré has documents that could compromise operations across Africa." On the other end, panic was evident. "How did he get these documents?" "We don't know, sir, but he has everything: schedules, budgets, agent lists, destabilization strategies. Evacuate now." It was too late. Traoré had resolved that the world would learn the truth about America's plans for Africa. At 6 o'clock that evening, Ibrahim Traoré stepped into the presidential palace's press room for a historic moment. Journalists from 47 countries filled the space, some attending via remote connection. "Ladies and gentlemen of the international press," Traoré began, his voice resonating with authority. "Today, I reveal a secret American operation threatening the sovereignty of all Africa." On the screen behind him flashed the CIA logo and the title Operation Desert Dawn, classified. Murmurs of shock rippled through the room. This document, obtained through our national intelligence, outlines a systematic plan to destabilize African governments that resist Washington's influence. Traoré continued, pointing to key pages. A BBC journalist raised his hand. "President Traoré, can you confirm the authenticity of these documents?" "I can, and I will," Traoré replied calmly. "We have physical documents, recordings of communications, and bank transfers proving the operation." The screen displayed transcripts of intercepted conversations between American agents discussing ways to neutralize uncooperative leaders and implement final solutions to Burkina Faso's defiance. The room fell silent. The operation had 3 phases, Traoré explained methodically: economic destabilization, psychological warfare, and regime change. Burkina Faso, was a testing ground for tactics to be used across the continent. An Al Jazeera correspondent asked, "What evidence do you have of active implementation?" Traore's expression grew somber. 700 American agents operating on our soil under false identities, a ratio of one agent for every 31,000 Burkinabe. By comparison, that's like 10,000 foreign agents secretly operating in New York. That's why, Traore declared, his voice rising with resolve, I have ordered the immediate expulsion of these individuals. Burkina Faso will not be a laboratory for geopolitical experiments. The bombshell had detonated. The world now knew what America had planned for Africa. In the hours following Ibrahim Traoré's explosive press conference, shockwaves rippled across the globe. In Ouagadougou, the streets buzzed with a mix of pride and defiance as citizens absorbed the reality of their president's revelations. National radio repeated the headline, Burkina Faso stands tall. President Traoré exposes American plot. Outside the U.S. Embassy, crowds grew larger, not with violence, but with a quiet resolve, holding signs that read, Africa for Africans and no more puppets. Inside the embassy, chaos reigned as Ambassador James Whitaker scrambled to manage the fallout. We're burning everything we can, Agent Carter hissed into an encrypted call to Langley. But Traoré got it all, schedules, budgets, agent lists. It's a total disaster. At the presidential palace, Traoré sat with his inner circle, reviewing the next steps. The world is watching, he told Dr. Mariam Compere, the foreign minister. We've lit the fire, but now we must ensure it burns cleanly. No mistakes. Dr. Compere nodded, her face grim. The African Union is calling an emergency session tomorrow. They want a full briefing on Operation Sahel Dawn. China and Russia are already demanding answers from Washington. Good, Traoré said. We'll send them everything, documents, recordings, the works. Let the world see the truth. Major Salif Konate, the intelligence chief, entered with a fresh report. Sir, our teams are monitoring the 700 Americans. Most are scrambling to leave, but some are trying to cover their tracks. We've intercepted attempts to destroy equipment and documents. Traoré's eyes hardened. Let them try. Every move they make proves our case. Keep surveillance tight and detain anyone who misses the 48-hour deadline. At Ouagadougou International Airport, the scene was one of controlled pandemonium. Hundreds of Americans stood in long lines, clutching hastily packed bags. Among them was David Reynolds, posing as an agricultural consultant, but in reality a CIA specialist in psychological operations. He fidgeted nervously in the Air France queue, glancing at his phone for updates from his handlers. I need to be on this flight, he muttered to the attendant, claiming a family emergency. Nearby, Emily Harper, a supposed freelance journalist, flushed a stack of memory cards down a bathroom toilet. She had been running a network of social media influencers paid to spread anti-Traoré propaganda. In the parking lot, a businessman named Richard Monroe burned documents in his rental car before abandoning it. His real role, funneling CIA funds to local opposition groups. Traoré watched the airport footage from his office, security feeds streaming live. Look at them flee, he said to Dr. Compere. If they were truly innocent, tourists, aid workers, would they abandon everything in such a rush? It's too coordinated, Dr. Compere agreed. Innocent people don't destroy evidence and run. As the deadline approached, 23 Americans failed to board flights in time. Traoré gave the order, detain them for questioning. I want to know exactly what they were doing here. Among those held was Thomas Bennett, a senior CIA officer posing as an NGO coordinator. Documents found in his possession detailed a network of Burkinabe politicians paid to undermine Traoré's government. He's got names, amounts, bank accounts, everything, Major Konate reported, holding up a dossier. It's a full map of their corruption web. The next morning, Traoré held a second press conference, the room even more packed than before. Journalists from across the globe leaned forward, eager for the next chapter of revelations. Yesterday, we exposed Operation Sahel Dawn. Traore began, his voice calm but piercing. Today, we reveal how America tried to corrupt our own people to carry out their plans. The screen behind him lit up with names, photos, and payment details of 47 Burkinabe figures. Gasps echoed through the room. Deputy Moussa Cabaret received $340,000 to sabotage trade deals with China. Traore read aloud. Former Minister Jean Zongo was paid $180,000 to leak sensitive information from my office. The list went on. Journalists, union leaders, even a few military officers approached with bribes. This is the face of America's so-called democracy promotion, Traore said, his tone heavy with sorrow. They don't build freedom. They buy betrayal. A CNN journalist raised her hand. President Traore, how will you handle these collaborators? Justice will prevail, Traore replied firmly. Treason is a grave crime in any nation. They will face fair trials, but they will face consequences. Outside, the streets of Ouagadougou erupted in outrage against the exposed collaborators. Protesters gathered outside the homes of named politicians, chanting, "They sold our sovereignty for dollars." Some of the accused tried to flee, but borders were locked tight. Congressman Issa Tapsoba was caught at the airport with a suitcase stuffed with cash, attempting to board a flight to Ghana. Corruption has consequences, Traore declared to his team. We've shown the world that Africa is not for sale. Across the continent, the revelations sparked a domino effect. Mali, Niger, and Chad announced investigations into possible American interference in their own nations. The African Union's emergency session in Addis Ababa was electric with tension. If these documents are true, the EU chairman declared, they represent a gross violation of international law. America must answer. In Washington, the White House was in full crisis mode. President Donald Trump, woken in the dead of night, was livid. How did this African guy get our classified files? He roared at his CIA director. This is $1 trillion operation blown on global TV. Mr. President, we suspect an internal leak, the director stammered. Our priority is damage control. Damage control? Trump barked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You got our playbook. This is a catastrophe. European capitals expressed cautious concern, while China and Russia were blunt, condemning American imperialism masquerading as partnership. On social media, hashtags like Sahel Dawn and Ibrahim Truth exploded, with videos of the press conference racking up 200 million views in a day. Finally, someone stood up to the U.S. One tweet read, Ibrahim Traoré is Africa's hero. In Ouagadougou, citizens rallied behind their president. Traoré saved us from modern colonization, protesters chanted, waving Burkina Faso's flag. The tide was turning, and Burkina Faso was becoming a beacon of resistance. As the 48-hour deadline passed, the last commercial flight carrying Americans left Ouagadougou. The detained operatives faced intense questioning. Thomas Bennett's dossier revealed payments to local media to plant stories against Traoré, alongside plans to fund a rival political party. This is just the beginning, Traoré told Major Conate. We're not just cleaning our house, we're setting an example for the continent. By evening, Traoré prepared a statement for the African Union. We have unmasked a systematic plot against African sovereignty, he wrote. Burkina Faso stands firm, and we call on our brothers and sisters across the continent to join us in demanding respect. The statement, delivered to Addis Ababa, was met with resounding support. Meanwhile, at the U.S. Embassy, Whitaker received a curt message from Washington. Evacuate all non-essential personnel. Brace for international fallout. The ambassador sank into his chair, staring at the Burkina Faso flag visible through his window. We underestimated him, he muttered. Traoré's changed the game. 3 days after Ibrahim Traoré's seismic revelations, the global fallout intensified. In Ouagadougou, the mood was one of defiant unity. Citizens filled the streets, chanting sovereignty now and waving banners that read, "Burkina Faso leads. Africa rises." The presidential palace buzzed with activity as Traore and his team prepared for the next phase. "We've exposed the plot and the collaborators," Traore told Dr. Mariam Compare, the foreign minister. "Now we show the world that Africa can stand on its own." Dr. Compare nodded. The African Union is demanding a formal U.S. response. Mali and Niger have already expelled American military advisors. Chad's government is reviewing its agreements with Western NGOs. "Good," Traore said, his voice steady. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the continent waking up." Major Salif Konate entered with an update. "Sir, the detained American operatives are talking." Thomas Bennett's documents reveal payments to opposition leaders in 3 neighboring countries. They were building a regional network to destabilize governments. Traore's jaw tightened. "Share this with the AU immediately. Let every nation know the scope of this operation." At the U.S. Embassy, now nearly deserted, Ambassador James Whitaker packed his office under the watchful eyes of Burkinabe security. His phone buzzed with frantic messages from Washington. "The White House is in chaos," he told his deputy. "They're calling this the worst intelligence leak in decades." Across the city, the remaining American agents had vanished, leaving behind shredded papers and abandoned equipment. But the damage was done. Operation Sahel Dawn was a smoldering wreck. In Washington, President Donald Trump faced mounting pressure. At a White House press conference, he tried to deflect the crisis, his face flushed with frustration. "What Ibrahim Traoré did was steal classified American documents," he bellowed. "That's an act of war against the United States." A Washington Post reporter pressed him. "Mr. President, can you confirm the existence of Operation Sahel Dawn?" Trump hesitated, his eyes darting. "I'm not commenting on specific operations. America supports democracy in Africa, always has. But the documents show plans to overthrow elected governments," the reporter insisted. "Fake news," Trump snapped. "Traoré is a dictator who seized power in a coup. Of course he's lying about us." His outburst backfired. By calling the documents classified, Trump inadvertently confirmed their authenticity. Social media erupted. Traoré responded swiftly on Twitter. "President Trump verifies our documents by calling them classified. Thank you for confirming the truth about Sahel Dawn. When will America explain its 700 agents in our sovereign nation?" The tweet went viral, retweeted millions of times, with memes mocking Trump's blunder flooding the internet. In Ouagadougou, Traoré watched Trump's press conference with his team. "He's digging his own grave," Dr. Compare said, chuckling. "He just admitted the documents are real." Traoré nodded. "Let's keep the pressure on. Schedule interviews with BBC, Al Jazeera, and CCTV. The world needs to hear our voice." 6 months later, the African geopolitical landscape had transformed. Burkina Faso had become a global symbol of resistance, dubbed the Traoré effect by international media. Mali, Niger, Chad, and others followed suit, expelling Western military advisors and demanding equal partnerships. The African Union launched a formal investigation into American interference, with evidence from Burkina Faso's documents fueling demands for accountability. China, Russia, India, and Arab nations deepened ties with Burkina Faso, seeing Traoré as a steadfast leader. Aminata Zongo, the Minister of Economy, reported stunning progress. "Since the Americans left, our GDP has grown 23%. New trade deals with China and India are thriving. Real independence brings real prosperity." Traoré reflected on the transformation. "They wanted to control us," he told his advisors. "Instead, we've shown that a strong Africa lifts the world." In New York, Traoré addressed the UN General Assembly to a packed hall. 6 months ago, we exposed a covert operation treating Africa as a geopolitical laboratory, he declared, his voice resonant. "Today, Africa speaks as one. We will never again be anyone's colony." The room erupted in applause, with African delegates leading a standing ovation, joined by representatives from developing nations. Even some Western diplomats clapped quietly, wary of their government's complicity. In Washington, Trump faced a congressional probe. These documents are evidence of crimes against international law, a senator declared, holding up copies leaked by Burkina Faso. The CIA's budget for African operations was slashed, and Operation Sahel Dawn became a case study in diplomatic failure, taught in universities worldwide. A year later, Traore received the Nobel Peace Prize for his courageous defense of sovereignty and exposure of illegal operations threatening global stability. In his acceptance speech in Oslo, he stood tall, the Burkina Faso flag behind him. "This award is not mine," he said, his voice steady yet humble. "It belongs to all of Africa, which refuses to be a pawn in imperial games. We have shown that sovereignty is not negotiable, and truth is our greatest weapon." The room rose in applause, a global acknowledgement of Africa's awakening. Operation Sahel Dawn had collapsed, but it birthed something extraordinary. A united, sovereign Africa standing taller than ever before. In Ouagadougou, citizens celebrated their president's triumph, their streets alive with music and pride. "Traore showed the world who we are," one protester said, holding a sign that read, "Africa Unchained." Back in his office, Traore looked out over the city, the weight of his journey settling in. "They thought they could break us," he murmured to Dr. Compare. "But they only made us stronger." Burkina Faso, once a target, had become a beacon. The continent watched, inspired, as a new era of independence dawned.